Today is Monday, June 22nd, and we're about to begin our board workshop scheduled for 9 a.m. The time is 9:03 a.m. and welcome everyone. Today on our agenda, we have the Ethics in Education Policy 1.28, the RSM evaluation, and the RSM contract. So we're scheduled for 40 minutes each, and we will try today to be very mindful of our time. And at this point, if Dr. Atkins, if you have nothing, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Dupuy-Bruno.
Yeah, I have nothing, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning, board members. Good morning, Dr. Atkins. Good morning, Ms. McClung. So today we wanted to kind of have a broad discussion on certain things with regards to the Ethics in Education Policy, Policy 1.28. This was a policy that was brought forth before the board on May 28th, and it is the same policy that we'll be reviewing. Last time we ran out of time when we were going through the policy, so what I have done is compiled some broad general areas that I noticed that the board, at least more than one board member, had a concern about it. And whatever guidance that you give us today with regards to those broad areas is what we will take back, reformulate within the policy, and bring back to the committee. I do want the board to know that this will have to go back to the committee, and then we will also go back to the union to make sure that they are in agreement with the revised policy. We did try to have a meeting last week with the union, but unfortunately that was canceled due to some personal issues from one of the members. So we're going to reschedule that. So just to make sure, we will have to bring it back, and we will be able to address any of their concerns at that time. One of the main areas that seems to be coming up multiple times is the actual length of the policy. The policy is going to be shortened. You may have 3 or 4 different policies that will be coming before you when this is finally finalized. We're going to have the whistleblower retaliation policy. We'll have the ethics in education policy and a disciplinary process policy to try to make sure that we keep it to one subject area. That will certainly make the policy shorter in terms of length, and also make it easier for the reader since it will be broken down a little bit. Another question that I keep getting is with regards to certain provisions of the policy and whether or not they need to be part of the collective bargaining agreement, and how do we deal with that. So again, once we have the information and the feedback from the board, it goes back to the committee. It will definitely go back to the union, and we will be able to address those particular issues at that time. It's my understanding at this point, they are okay with the policy. However, as we make changes and revise things, there may be some additional issues that come up that we will need to discuss with them. Another area of concern that I keep getting is with regards to section 4F of the policy, which is line number 152 to 154. Daryl, if you can put that up for us, that's on page 4. I've had concerns with regards to this section. 1, does it need to be included in the policy? 2, it's too broad. 3, it's too limited. So I think this is an area that the board will have to discuss. This particular section deals with separation of powers. It addresses and delineates the powers and duties of the school board, as well as the powers and duties of the superintendent, noting that it's specifically outlined by the Florida statute. And it basically says that the governance from the administrative process and procedures is left to the superintendent, and the school board is responsible for the governance. and the superintendent is responsible for the administrative processes and procedures. So I'm going to open this up to the board for discussion. Again, I have had comments that say it should not be in the policy. I've had comments that say this is not strong enough language. I have comments that have said this is too strong of a language. Do I have any comments from the board with regards to this particular section of the policy?
Board members? Ms. Dupuy-Bruno, I don't see any hands at this point.
Okay, so without any further discussion, then I'm going to take that as meaning that the board.
Excuse me, I had my hand up.
I don't see it on here, Ms. Gittens. The policy is on here, and I'm looking for the hands on the participants, and at this point now I do see two hands. The first one was Ms. Vaughn, and the second one is Mrs. Patrica. I couldn't see the faces, Ms. Gittin, because the policy was up there. So I was looking at the participants list for the little blue hand. Sorry. Ms. Vaughn.
Well, I was one of the people who said I thought it should be eliminated. I think it's very clearly spelled out elsewhere, and I just don't think it's necessary to bring it into the policy.
Thank you very much. The next hand then is Ms. Patrica, followed by Mrs. Morgan, followed by Ms. Gittins.
I think that the best way to clean it up is referring specifically to the statute. The statute that delineates specifically what school board member role is and what we're supposed to do, and then the statute that specifically delineates what the superintendent's role is and what he's supposed to do. We have statutory requirements for the work. And so just referring to that specifically will clear up any question as to what that means. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm just going to piggyback on that. I agree with that because for many of our policies, we can see at the bottom the statutes are delineated that guide us in that. So thank you. Next is Mrs. Morgan.
Yeah, I agree. I think the statute is fine. The reference to the statute is fine in policy, and I think then in protocol, any further descriptions we wish to use to describe it is fine, but I think we should leave it as statute strictly.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morgan. Ms. Gittins.
Now, my main concern from the beginning was to make sure that there were certain, I guess, procedures or whatever mentioned. And the one thing that has been discussed a lot is the makeup of the committees. I don't know how we make sure that that's in there, but I am really concerned about the makeup of the two committees that do the meetings will just be the same as it's always been. And if that's the case, then why are we even worrying about doing it? The whole purpose in my mind of the policy is to look at how can we adjust some of those things and make it not that one group is, judge, jury, and executioner. So as long as we are able to do that, I am not willing to just say, if we take this out and then you come back and say, well, we took that out, so it's all up to the superintendent to delineate who's in that group. That's a concern for me, that we do see some change in the way these meetings are held.
Thank you, Ms. Gittins. That is a question that we're going to talk about because I've gotten a lot of board member questions and comments with regards to that process. So we will be discussing that today in detail because we do need guidance from the board as to how you want to proceed. With regards to the separation of powers, is it okay to take this section out and put the statutory references, or you want to keep this section in and say pursuant to Florida statute, et cetera, et cetera. What is the board's desire?
Okay, so board members, those who want to go with eliminating it and
I
having,
have a question first.
Ms. Gittens?
Yes, I was still discussing it. Ms. Dupree Bruno, my question is, if we take this portion out, how does that affect the other part that we're going to discuss? Are we going to take this out and get a consensus on that, and it will affect whether or not we can talk about what the committees do, because then that goes into this bucket, that it's the superintendent's role to do this.
So with regards to this particular section, which is line 152 to 156, the separation of powers, the statute is pretty clear on this and gives the definition of what the superintendent's responsibilities are and what his duties are. And it also gives the board's responsibility and duties. So I think this is just pretty much reiterating what the statute says. I don't think it's necessary for this part in the policy because the statute speaks for itself and it's referenced in the statute. The board is going to decide as to how they want to move forward with some other sections in the policy, but this particular provision, I don't believe will affect the other provisions in the policy. It's just really reiterating what's out there in the statute already.
Thank you. Then board members, those who want to eliminate that paragraph to shorten the policy and leave the reference, the statutory reference at the end of the policy, please indicate by raising your thumb. Okay, and so we have, Ms. Patrica, did you have your thumb up?
I did not. The nature of my comments was to leave the paragraph in there with a specific statutory reference, because it is my opinion that other parts of the policy do conflict with this paragraph. And this paragraph really should be the guiding paragraph when we're looking to include process and procedure in a policy.
Okay. Then, so you're saying then that the statutory reference is not sufficient in regard to this paragraph?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Morgan. Please unmute, Ms. Morgan.
I would like Ms. Patrica to just reiterate what she said and maybe embellish it a little bit. By example, maybe?
One of my concerns in the policy as it was brought to us, and all of this may be worked out as new policy.
Madam Chair, can I call point of order? We were in the middle of a consensus vote, and I think we should conclude that vote. And then, as has happened in the past, then we go back and see why people voted the way they did. We were in the middle of the vote, if I'm not correct.
I think, Madam Chair, in that regard, I do agree with Ms. Gittens. You had asked for the consensus, and I think you were just verifying with Ms. Patrica whether or not she had her thumbs up. And then Ms. Patrica gave an explanation, and then Ms. Morgan wanted her to elaborate on that.
Then we'll finish the vote, the consensus vote. We have 5 in the affirmative and 2 dissenting, and then we would move on to.
Madam Chair, just so I am clear, the 5 that are in the affirmative are in the affirmative for what specifically?
To eliminate the policy, to eliminate that paragraph and just have the statutory reference at the end of the policy.
Okay.
Okay. So that was Ms. Vaughn, Ms. Jordan, Ms. Giovanelli, Mrs. Morgan, and myself.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go ahead and skip directly to the section that Ms. Gittens has brought up, because I have received a lot of comments, questions, and concerns with regards to this. And we will go to page
Ms. Dupree Bruno, if I may, shall we entertain Ms. Morgan's question or request of Ms. Patrica? And then I have another hand that's been up for a little bit, and that's Ms. Jordan.
Yes, ma'am. This goes directly to what Ms. Patrica was discussing, which is going to be that section 8, which is where I am getting a lot of concerns and questions from board members. And this section is with regards to the investigation procedures. It starts with line 370, page 9, and goes through page 12, line 536. And I believe that this is probably an area that we really need to discuss, because I think that's exactly one of the things that's concerning to Ms. Patrica. So I don't know if you want at this point for Ms. Morgan to finish her thought and then Ms. Patrica to provide her thoughts on that. And then I can tell you what the board members' concerns are.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Morgan.
No, I was just asking that Ms. Patrica provide an example so I understood what it was she was trying to say. That's all. And that's where we are.
Thank you. Then Ms. Patrica.
I think we're going to get to it. The step-by-step process for employee investigations, it should not be part of policy. It should be processes that are approved, created and approved by the superintendent, and then we have measures in place to determine whether those processes and policies are effective. And I think Ms. Dupree Bruno is going to get to that. I do have to express a little bit of frustration here. I had no idea what we were talking about this morning. We were just talking about the policy in general, and so I'm having a hard time coming up to speed on these specific issues because I wasn't aware of what exactly we were going to be talking about. So, those are my comments.
This is a continuation of our workshop from the 28th, where we ran out of time because we're going line by line and we ran out of time. So I had requested from Madam Chair that we have another workshop where we talk about the broad areas of concerns so that we can get some guidance from the board as to how to proceed. So this is just a pickup from May 28th's workshop. So one of the areas that we've had a lot of feedback is with regards to section 8, which is the investigation procedures. I have comments that are concerns with regards to the specificity, how specific this section is. Are we able to be this specific in this section? I think it goes along with what Ms. Patrica was discussing in terms of the superintendent coming up with the processes. There was a lot of concern with regards to fairness and due process in the investigation process. There was concerns about the legal implication of having the same individuals participate in a process from beginning to end. So there was just a lot of concerns all the way around on section 8. Now, section 8 is the section that discusses the actual investigation process. It is very specific. And I think the specificity really begins on line 455, which discusses how the discipline process is as it relates to the outcomes. It outlines the predetermination meeting/hearing. It outlines the outcome review team, and it outlines the outcome review team level 2 or second review committee or appeal. So those are the things that seems to be a concern, either that a concern as to who is participating in these committees, and concerns as to, are we supposed to have this amount of specificity in this policy? So at this point, I will open it up to the board, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. So, Ms. Jordan, you had your hand up for a while, or did you still want to comment?
No, I was just, after Ms. Patrica had said what she started to say, what she was saying, I understood why she was wanting that to stay there. Because I know if you put a statute and it's not coincides with something else, people are not necessarily going to go look at what that statute is. So seeing what it actually is and then referring it to that number is different. But we're not on that topic right now, but that's the only thing I was going to make mention of.
Thank you very much.
Think about what we're on now, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jordan. Okay, Ms. Gittens.
Well, since Ms. Jordan brought that up, I just wanted to say that in most of our other policies, it's at the bottom of the policy, the statutes are listed and they're not listed all throughout the document. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So then Mr. Prebruno was looking for Ms. Patrica.
So I think my concerns begin with the second line of the paragraph 8. I don't know if it's still paragraph 8. Investigative procedures. The second line says investigative procedures shall be defined by school board policy and shall account for the following. Procedures should not be part of policy,
Right.
and we should not be defining what those policies are. So I would argue that anything after that paragraph shouldn't be included in the policy. That's what the superintendent does. He puts together the procedures, we review them, we determine what measures we as a board will put in place to determine whether those procedures are effective, and then we evaluate the superintendent. But we don't require certain procedures. So, I mean, you know, you go all the way down to, I don't remember what line you went down to regarding predetermination hearings, but I think much of what's included before that is also not appropriate for policy.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Patrica. Ms. Gittens.
Thank you. I would refer to line 479, I believe it is, if I'm looking at it correct, under outcome of review team. And it says procedures shall be established for conflict of interest screening to ensure the integrity of outcomes. That is not, I don't think, stepping out of our purview to say that the committee needs to reflect that conflict of interest and the integrity of the outcomes. That is saying, okay, when this committee is put together, this is what needs to be considered. And then how do we, as the governance team, make sure that that's done? I just think that's a very, very, very important part. I personally feel that I would not have confidence in a process where the review team is the same it just does everything. You know, they start the investigation, they do the committees, we need some outside of that realm eyes to look at a situation.
Thank you, Ms. Gittens. Ms. Vaughn.
I have a question about this. We started this discussion talking about dividing this really long policy. So right now it's just all dumped in ethics. Would there be a different procedure that might be spelled out? Because we're going to do, you mentioned a whistleblower. Okay, might something like this work better on whistleblower? I mean,
So
I guess what I'm saying is, are there going to be really two different, at least initially, two different ways to investigate? At least the way the investigation is initiated will be somewhat different when these tips or these complaints come in over the whistleblower.
Okay, so those are two questions, Ms. Vaughn. So the first question is in terms of this part of the policy, where does it belong? Does it belong in a whistleblower section or does it belong someplace else? And my recommendation would be that we actually have it in a different policy called the discipline process or the investigation process or something like that. In reviewing the board's policy, I will note that we have a section that talks about some of these things, not this particular process, but there is a section that relates to complaints relating to employees. This is Board Policy 5.31. This policy is specifically addressing the procedures regarding complaints to employees. And my thought was that this section with regards to the investigation and discipline process belongs somewhere there, and it would probably be Board Policy 5.311, because that's kind of where it fits in. You have the first section that talks about the complaints, and then the second section would talk about the discipline process. If the board wants to include that in its policies, it's up to the board's discretion.
Okay, and that really goes to that goes to the heart of what I'm saying, because I think part of the problem with this is that it's part of that, it's just too long, and it jumps from one thing to another. I mean, even though we have the paragraph divisions and all of that, but it just doesn't fit in with the ethics to me. And I think we need to look at, what was it, 5.03, you said?
There is Board Policy 5.31.
Okay.
We address complaints relating to employees. Following that policy has specific procedures for complaints relating to sexual harassment and discrimination by employees. That's Board Policy 5.32. And there's also Board Policy 5.33, which addresses specific complaint procedures for harassment and discrimination by employees. So somewhere in these sections is where that discipline process would fall in. It would not be in Chapter 1 of the board policy. It fits better in Chapter 5 of the board policies.
Or possibly if there's a different procedure, a slightly different procedure, at least in the way it's initiated, on whistleblower.
And then the whistleblower hotline in retaliation would also kind of fit in more under Chapter 5 of the board policies.
Okay.
And that would be, my recommendation would be, that would be a completely separate policy that just talks about the whistleblower. It would follow Florida Statute 112, which is what discusses the whistleblower as well as retaliation.
Thanks. We just have a huge chunk here, and it almost seems if everybody else believes that it goes somewhere else, either in Chapter 5 or the new whistleblower, that we just kind of put this aside. No? However, it works best for everyone. That's my comment.
I would not recommend that it actually goes in the whistleblower policy, because I think that policy is very specific to a particular statute. But the discipline process, I think, falls in line better with Chapter 5 of our board policies.
Great. Is that it, Ms. Vaughn? Thank you. Okay, next I have Ms. Giovanelli.
Hi, is it on? I don't think it's on.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I was going to recommend is that we asked for the board attorney to separate this out the way she thinks it should be, and I think bring it back and let's try to wrap it up that way. I think that we all are in agreement that this is too long and it does need to be separated out into the proper policies. So I actually agree with what Ms. Gittens mentioned regarding the integrity of the investigation, and I think that that's really important. But I do believe that this policy is just way too long, and I think that if we can get everything in its proper policy, we can move this along a little bit better. And that would be my recommendation is to the board attorney to put it the way she thinks, and then we come back and look at it and then I think agree, because I think it's just too cumbersome now. So that's my opinion, and my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Yes,
I was just, thank you. I was just reading 5.31, and Ms. Bruno is correct. I do believe that that part should be in there because a lot of that is already there inside of that. So it's like we're putting it in two different places. So I kind of agree with Ms. Giovanelli as well with we need to have this, you know, put the stuff where it really needs to be. And if it's already there, we shouldn't be redoing it. And then that way it can come to us and it will be nice and clean. And I think we'll be able to work much better. But a lot of what is in this is definitely already in there, but just maybe a word or two has changed.
Yeah.
Ms. Bruno.
So, and I agree, and we're going to do that and break it up and bring it back to the board after the committee has reviewed it and the union has given its blessing. The guidance that I need from the board, however, is what to do about this discipline/investigation procedure. Does the board want me to revise this and create a policy that incorporates this process or not? That's what I need guidance on. And I'm specifically talking about the Section 8.
So if I may comment on that, as I read through it multiple times, it is indeed cumbersome and it is repetitive from the parts of some other policies, including the whistleblower and the 5.31. Then also it looked to me like a lot of what was in the content was really something that would be in the procedure manual or the process document or whatever we're calling that for the implementation of the policy. So that would be my only comment. And then Ms. Gittens has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. 2 quick points. One, we had received before some samples from other districts, and I guess I'm asking Mr. Bruno to, not at this time because it will take time to do it, but to look at how in comparison, especially I think Palm Beach was one of the ones that was closely aligned to what many of us at least liked. And 2, Mr. Bruno mentioned a discipline process. I think we have to be very careful as we're shifting and changing this, the terminology, whether it's process or policy, and because something could be taken out and then deemed as a process, and then it is out of our hands to have anything to say about it. So I'm just saying that my concern is just to make sure that we don't deem something a process that should be a policy or a policy that should be a process. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Morgan?
So I'm for taking the entire section out and putting it in 5.31, and I think we have to have a conversation about 5.31.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgan. Ms. Patrica?
You know, there's been some discussion about potential bargaining issues. I think this is one of the big areas of potential bargaining issues. One of my frustrations here has been I have had to comb through these policies and identify potential bargaining issues. I think those issues should be identified for us. I don't necessarily have the capacity to read through a policy and understand the impact on the collective bargaining process or the existing contract. And I fear that I have missed items in my review of the policy as I review the contract. So I would like, whether that's staff job, staff attorney job, school board attorney job, I don't know whose job it is, but I have repeatedly asked questions about collective bargaining issues, and I've not gotten any specific responses. I would like to know when this comes back to us, if it comes back to us as 12 policies or 3 policies, what specific items in the policy will have to be bargained. I think that TALC and SPALC's participation in this process is essential. And are we having conversations? I understand you're going to go back to the committee, and you said that, they're happy with the policy up to this point. That has not been the feedback that I've gotten. In fact, the feedback I've gotten is the 180-degree opposite. They feel ignored in this process, and they feel as if their due process rights are potentially going to be violated by these policies. And there are several specific items that have to be bargained. So I would beg that as we move forward, please identify those issues for me so that I'm not missing something in my review. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Ms. Bruno. Ms. Bruno, please unmute.
Thank you. In reviewing the collective bargaining agreement specifically for TALC, Article 9 discusses the discipline process. That process in their policy is not very specific. I know that they had the intention of trying to get something a little bit specific during the 2019-2020 year, and this is why we will be going to them to discuss it. But they have not previously gone through any specifics in their prior contracts with regards to any type of discipline action. It's not very, very specific. So yes, I do agree with you that this is something that we need to discuss with them. Following the press release that came out, I do believe that Dr. Atkins had spoken to them and had gotten whatever concerns that they had and discussed these things. And at this point, I believe they were okay with where we were. Now, as we make changes and revisions and we get a little bit more specific, we will definitely include them in the process. We were supposed to have a meeting last week with them that could not move forward. So we will make sure we reschedule. And prior to this coming back to the board, when we come back to the board, we will be able to say specifically, this is the position of the union. We want to make sure they're on board with this.
Thank you. Ms. Gittens.
If I may ask, Ms. Patrica said that there was like a 180-degree difference or whatever with the union. Can you please be a little more specific on some of the concerns you have with the union in this?
I sent a long list of questions to Attorney Bruno this morning about areas of the policy as presented that may conflict with our existing agreement with both bargaining units.
Well, and I believe in the beginning, our attorney said that they would be taking it back to the union for these discussions, and I guess she will take your concerns as well and be able to answer those questions once they meet with the union. But she said a couple of times that she was that they would be meeting with the union. So.
And then at this point, there's nothing specifically that conflicts with the collective bargaining agreement per se. Pursuant, when you're looking at the policy and the contract, the issue is to make sure that the union is comfortable with the language that we're using in the policy. And that's what we're trying to make sure that we do. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to make sure that employees have full due process rights and that we have a fair and objective process, that if there's discipline issues that they can follow and they can be rest assured that it's objective, fair, and affording as much due process as possible.
Ms. Gittens.
Just a quick question. The union is going to be involved and give feedback on how they feel about it. Will they filter that down to the employees at all? I mean, will there be any type of input from the employees as to how this is laid out and their input on it?
That question I can't answer. It really depends after we have our meeting with them, what they would like to do and how they would like to handle that.
Yeah, I just feel that somewhere along the line, it's so overarchingly going to affect employees that somewhere in the process we should find out what they think about it. Just a thought.
Thank you, Ms. Gittens. We'll keep that in the back of our mind when we discuss it with the union.
Then I have two comments. One is that I think the bottom line here is that we are looking to ensure, with the support of our bargaining units, that due process is afforded to every single employee. And so that's one of my concerns. And then looking at policy 5.31, the last time it was revised was August of 2016. And so this may be a time for us to review that policy and then take what has come out of your meetings with your committee and with the unions and kind of integrate that and update that policy. Statutory references, the authority are all there, ones that you've already mentioned, like 10, 12. So that would be my comment at this point. And then Ms. Giovanelli has her hand up.
Actually, I would be interested in Ms. Patrica's list of questions and emails, because I actually, after that press release came out, I actually called Dr. Farzone and he never returned my call. So I would be interested to see the information that Ms. Patrica has discussed with them and see their concerns, because I had an appointment with them last week and they apparently canceled it and didn't tell me. So the communication is not with all of us. So I think that it would be important for all of us to see that her list and see their concerns. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, board members, for Ms. Bruno? Okay, Ms. Bruno.
So, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure that I have a consensus from the board to go ahead and incorporate this section, move things around, either be it in 5.31 or 5.311 with regards to Section 8 of the policy. I just want to make sure I have a consensus from the board for that.
Okay. For the sake of all there, will we? So you're going to, this is part of your original proposal that you were going to shorten the policy by splitting it up. And this would be that the investigative process part would go into complaints regarding employees, 5.1.
It could be like so that 5.31 does not become too long. It may actually be a 5.311 section.
Okay.
So somewhere in 5.31 to 5.33, that's where it belongs.
Thank you. Could you explain to me then the difference in having that regarding the employees policy versus the ethics and education under governance in policy 1?
Yeah. So the ethics and education would be a completely different policy, most likely that would remain in Chapter 1. And then the investigation and the discipline process is completely different and belongs under human resources in Chapter 5. It goes along with the complaint process and procedure.
Thank you. Okay. So then board members, wait, I see one more comment, Ms. Gittens.
Actually, Ms. Fisher, it's the fact that you really did not address Ms. Giovanelli's request. It was that we just moved on and there was nothing conclusive saying that we would or would not receive that information. And for the record, I would ask whether, you could just state that so that it's in the record that we will receive that information.
Yes, Ms. Bruno.
I just want to clarify what information the board members are requesting, because all of the board members sent me comments and questions with regards to the policy. So are you requesting that information or are you requesting something else? I'm not sure.
I think we're requesting that we all get to see everyone else's questions, which is good practice, because then as we do with agenda reviews, we all see the same information and we are cognizant of the questions that are asked by the various board members.
Okay. And if there's a consensus on that, then I will forward that to the board members.
Okay, so then board members, is that what we're looking for, board members, that we all want to know which questions were submitted, which questions and comments were submitted regarding the policy 1.28 to Ms. Bruno? Okay, and before we finish our consensus, I just need to allow Ms. Morgan. Did you have your hand up?
I took it down.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, Ms. Bruno.
So, Madam Chair, I'm wearing two hats today, presenting as well as being parliamentarian. I do have to tell you that there was a consensus that was pending prior to this consensus. The one that was pending was the one with regards to whether or not the board wants me to move forward with Section 8 and putting that into a policy in Chapter 5. And then you had the second consensus as to providing all of the questions and comments relating to this policy.
Yes, thank you for that. Okay, so then we'll finish the first consensus regarding policy 5.31 and potentially 5.311 regarding the complaints regarding employees and the investigative process. So are we all in consensus that Ms. Bruno will incorporate the investigative process part with the Chapter 5 in our policies? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1 can live with it. Okay, that's that one. Then moving on to the second one, and would you repeat that for us?
The second one was with regards to providing all of the questions and comments and answers that the board members submitted to me individually to all of the board members.
Yes. Okay. And board members, everybody.
Chris has had her hand up. Ms. Patrica's had her hand
Oh,
up.
I'm sorry. And I keep looking at the participant list and I'm sorry, Ms. Patrica, go ahead.
That's quite all right. I have sent lists and lists and lists of questions and suggestions on this policy. And I would suspect that that will be quite a bit of work for Attorney Dupree Bruno. How informative it will be for me to know what your questions are, I don't know. To me, it seems like a bit of a waste of time, but if we are going to proceed with this, I would ask that every single question and every single comment that I've made be included, because taking things out of context or looking at things in a vacuum would be inappropriate. And so my sense would be that, there's no reason to do that, but if it's the board's pleasure, I will certainly go along.
And that's a very good point because, Ms. Bruno, may I ask you this? Was it not your intention to take the board member questions and comments and then have responses regarding those questions and comments as you started this session, that you'd be answering them as you proceeded through this workshop?
Yes, that was my intention. Basically, what I did was those that were grammatical or sentence structure type of concerns, we dealt with those. Those that I felt needed to be brought before the board, that's why we have these broad topics to bring before the board. And my intention was, the board members sent me their comments and concerns. I responded to most of them. We discussed things on the phone, and the intent was to bring these broad topics to the board so that I can get some guidance as to how to move forward. It wasn't my intention to share all of those comments and questions with the board, but it's to the board's discretion as to how they want to move forward.
Okay, then I have 3 more comments before we proceed with this, and that is Ms. Gittens first, Ms. Vaughn, and then Ms. Giovanelli.
Okay, thank you. I believe this conversation started regarding the union's involvement and Ms. Patrica's statement that she had several concerns about that. So that's one part of it. I was not aware of that because I, don't have that information from them as well. And I would be interested in that. And as Mr. Bruno said, she's not bringing to us all of the, you know, ands and thus and does and whatever. So I just think overall the general questions is all. And am I understanding, Mr. Bruno, that that's what you do anyway and give us the overall questions?
So for the most part, when a board member sends an email asking a specific question, I try to respond to that particular question, or we may have an individual phone call to answer that question. If it's something that needs to be decided by the board, I will advise the board member that this is something that needs to be discussed by the board.
Well, I'm thinking that, you know, I don't want to see grammatical stuff. I would just like to see content that is.
I'm a little confused. Are you asking for the general questions that were asked, or are you asking for the questions that the union asked? That's what I'm a little confused upon.
Okay, to me, this all started because of the comment that Ms. Patrica made about the union questions. And that was what we wanted to see. Then it grew into, well, we need to see all questions. But I don't, like I said, I would divide that and not say, I don't want to see move this comma over here and move this over there. But what I would like to see are the union questions, the overall changes to the content questions that might be something that would affect what we decide. So I'm not saying Ms. Patrica would give us, you know, reams and reams of all the things she's turned in, but just the questions that have to do with content.
Thank you, Ms. Gittens. Mrs. Vaughn.
Well, personally, I think it's just work heavy for Mr. Bruno to have to provide all the questions for sure. And some of them now are a moot point because we've been talking about this a long time, and some of them don't even pertain anymore because they were changed. Secondly, regarding the union, I actually, because I didn't get to talk to Dr. Fazone when I had my regular meeting, he was busy. I arranged to talk with him, and we had a good discussion, and I think the best thing is we're making changes right now, and then Mr. Bruno is bringing it to the union, and at that point, if they have put something in that we think doesn't work for us, then we can discuss it at that point. But I know lots of the things that he was saying had to do with due process, and he something we already mentioned about committees, and he felt like the committees, like there was one person or a small group, and some of the things that were actually in the news release. So I really don't see the point of it because it is going back to the union committee. And at that point, we can deal with whatever it is that they still find doesn't work for them. So that's a comment.
Thank you very much. Ms. Giovanelli, then Mrs. Morgan and Mrs. Patrica.
I was only just, Ms. Patrica mentioned a list of questions and concerns that the union had that she sent this morning. That was, if she had information that I obviously don't have, and Ms. Gittens, and apparently maybe Ms. Vaughn does, I was just saying that's what needed to be shared, not every single question. I was concerned over the union piece of it because this is about due process for the employees, and it's very important that we are all on the same page. And when Dr. Fazone didn't call me back the day that the press release went out, I am concerned, and I had looked forward to speaking with him about it and didn't have that opportunity. So if somebody else has that, I would love for that to be shared, and that's where I was coming from. It had nothing to do with this, all these questions and this and that, and everybody's No, I'm not, I want to be clear, I'm not asking for that, never did, so I don't know who took that out of context. It was just specifically regarding the union piece, and information. And Ms. Morgan, you're not muted, so your sides are very obvious. Thank you.
I'm sorry, my apologies.
Thank you, Ms. Giovanelli. Mrs. Morgan, please proceed.
Yeah, I'm sighing, and my apologies. I'm just really, oh shoot, I'm gonna mute, I'll come back later. Sorry, my apologies.
Thank you. Ms. Patrico, you want to go ahead while Ms. Morgan is busy?
Sure. I mean, these are being characterized as union questions. These questions came out of my review of the contract and my review of the policy. As I took the policy and I compared it to the contract, I came up with questions about collective bargaining issues. These are not union questions. They're being characterized incorrectly. And I don't know what we're doing. Can we just move forward? Can we give the board
Yes.
direction, please?
Yes, thank you. We'll entertain Ms. Morgan, and then we will look at our time and come up with a direction for the board attorney.
Back to what I was saying earlier, I'm just really confused. I don't understand what the goal is here. When I communicate with the board attorney about questions regarding the contract or SPALC or whatever, that's between me and the board attorney. If the board attorney believes that that's something that needs to come forward to the full board for discussion, that's great. I mean, I'm sort of, what I'm hearing is that board members want to be able to read every conversation that every board member has with every employee. And I just don't think that's necessary. Attorney Dupree Bruno collected information from us, came back with recommendations or discussions. We've all had the opportunity to discuss it. If there's anything left for discussion, I believe that at this point it should be brought to Attorney Dupree Bruno. And if she needs to bring it back to the board, that's fine. I just don't understand what the whole purpose of this request for. A board member talks to the union. The board member asks a question of the board attorney. The board member is not representing the union position. The board member is simply taking a question that came to them and asking the question. The responsibility of the union position is the union, not the board member. And I think that's all covered in the process that Attorney Dupree Bruno has set forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dupree Bruno.
Madam Chair, I have to agree with Ms. Morgan. I want the board members to be able to be free to ask questions and to get comments. Sometimes those are just clarification questions. Sometimes they are really just going through policies and correcting some grammatical things. Anything that requires a board vote or board decision on, I bring back to the board for guidance or for the board to vote. I would really hesitate to set precedent that whenever a board member asks me a question that I have to submit the answer to that question or the question even to the board. Now, going back to what Ms. Giovanelli said, I think Ms. Giovanelli was asking if there were specific questions asked by the union, we would like to know what those questions are. And I think that's a fair statement. If the union asks this question, what are those questions? With regards to questions asked from board members to me, that doesn't have to do with specifically what the union asked. I would be cautious about that because I don't want to set that precedent. And Madam Chair, I'm concerned about time. I'm putting my parliamentarian hat on, and I have two other broad topics with regards to this policy that I need guidance on.
Okay, so then let's at this moment let you proceed, and I'm concerned about time because we are already 12 minutes over our allotted time of 40 minutes. So will you please address those topics and allow the board to weigh in for guidance? And let's try to, do you think we need more than another 10 minutes?
It depends on how quickly you guys give me the answers to the question. It's one of them is with regards to training. I received a lot of questions as to does the training that we currently receive from FSBA cover the training that is discussed in the board policy and the ethics in education? And that would be on page, line number 82 and 85. It discusses the annual training. And that training in this language also discusses training on this particular policy. So the question was, does our FSBA training cover this? And then the second question was, if we have to do this training, do we need to do it annually? Can we do it whenever there is a change in the statute or a change in the policy? So those are answers and guidance that I need from the board.
Board members? Ms. Gittens, please unmute.
No, I didn't know you had called on me. The question, I'm just a little confused about the question, Mr. Bruno, and I'm sorry. Can you kind of package that a little bit different to make sure I understand what you're asking?
Yes, so in the policy, it talks about professional development, and this will be in the ethics and education part of the policy. And it talks about training in that all school board members shall receive training on this policy, related laws and regulations once annually. This is referring to the ethics in education. And it also says that the training shall be provided to the school board based on the recommendations of the school board attorney. So the questions that I received was, does the training that you are provided by and through FSBA, will that be sufficient? Does that suffice? Or if we have to have training, do we have to have training annually, or do we have training whenever the statute changes or whenever this policy needs to be updated and is changing? So that's what I need to understand. Do you want to say that the FSBA training covers this in terms of the language requirement for the training? Or do you want to say that, if this policy changes, then we have the training? I mean, these are just questions that have been posed by board members that I need a little guidance on.
So then with regard to the annual FSBA ethics training, that annual scheduling is to accommodate changes in statutes. And so I've always been satisfied with that. And I think that with the updates and the communication between board members and the school board attorney, I think that we're covered when we have an update or a policy change during the year, between December. So that would be my comment. And then I see that Ms. Vaughn has her hand up.
I agree with Ms. Fisher that I would just remove that, because just this month, we all had to send in to the Department of Education certifying that we took the ethics. So it's kind of overkill to say we're going to have it again. And I'm not sure what revision I have in my hand. Did we already zap the part right at the end of what was this, number 3, that the school board chairperson shall publicly report the names of the school board members? We already got rid of that, didn't we?
Okay, so that's another in my final issue for the board is the broad topic of the board policing itself. And there was a section with regards to public reprimand. So those are things I also need guidance from the board.
Well, on that, because I had it marked to get rid of it, that part. But now that we're talking about this, Department of Education polices us. And that's all we really need. We don't need to be shot twice if we don't do this. So I would just zap that whole section, or just make reference that all of us have to take the ethics training.
Could you just tell me what line or what page or line or section that you're looking at so I can follow with you?
I'm looking at, it starts on my copy, line 81 is required by Florida statute. But then it goes into the training provided to the school board, blah, blah, blah. And it ends with board chairperson publicly reporting the names of board members who have failed to complete the training. And again, as I said, we are policed by Department of Education. We yearly must send this in to certify we took the training. So I really don't see, we might want to leave in a reference to the statute, but to go through all of that, it makes it sound like we have to do a second training. So that's my comment.
I don't know if there are any other comments, Madam Chair, but I would request a consensus to modify this language so it reflects that the FSBA training that you're already receiving would satisfy this requirement.
Okay, any other comments or questions before that? No, okay. Then Ms. Bruno is asking for consensus that our FSBA ethics training satisfies the requirements. That's unanimous, Ms. Bruno.
And then, Madam Chair, in addition to what Ms. Vaughn said with regards to the public ouster of those that did not complete the training, as well as line 627 to 635 on page 14, which discusses public sanction for any board member that violates the policy. Questions were raised about that, and I do want to know what the board's thoughts are regarding that portion of the policy. Anything that discusses public sanction or public outing of a board member for violation of policy.
Yes, then I have Ms. Patrica, and then I have a comment.
I do think that, I've discussed my concerns here before. The dangerous precedent it sets and the dangerous message it sends to our employees that we will hold them to a standard that we will not hold ourselves to, I think is the wrong message to send to our employees. And I think that inclusion of the board in any education ethics policy we set forth, any requirements we place on our employees have to be equally placed on us if we're to have any sense of credibility for our employees at all.
Thank you. Now, as far as the policing part and the public announcement, I agree with Mrs. Vaughn, and that is that the DOE polices us, and we are bound to an annual statement and a swearing that we have taken the ethics course. And I would be personally uncomfortable to police my colleagues. We're all elected constitutional officers and we're bound by the same requirements. And so, and there's a bigger entity that monitors that. So I don't think we need to monitor one another. That's my own personal opinion. And then I have Ms. Giovanelli.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. I would agree with you because we've had board members that think that they are judge, trial, and jury, and I don't think that that's the way it works. We have to have due process, and that needs to be allowed, and that follows from the state. So we didn't do anything to a board member that decided to be our voice at a public meeting, and we let that go. So I think that that should be because that was against our policy. So I think we need to be very clear that everything falls under the DOE. So I would agree with you, Ms. Fisher. Thank you. And Ms. Vaughn.
Thank you. Mrs. Morgan.
So I don't believe that we should be treated any differently than the employee. Anything with respect to how matters, what?
Oh, we're buffering, Mrs. Morgan.
Oh, okay. That being said, I don't believe there needs to be public sanction. We don't publicly sanction employees. If the DOE has a finding and it's a matter of record, it's a matter of record. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much. Ms. Patrica?
And Ms. Giovanelli's comments sort of go to the heart of my concern here. There are repeated allegations that I have violated a policy when in fact, I've gotten the opinion of the board attorney that I have not violated a policy. And so, you know, we need to put an end to this accusing each other of doing something wrong when there is absolutely no basis in fact for that. You know, we do have a board member who's actually under investigation by the State Ethics Commission as we speak. And I never bring that up. I never bring that up because that is not an appropriate discussion for us to be having as a board at the board table. If you have concerns about my behavior, please go to the board attorney. Please ask her whether a violation occurred, whether it be a policy violation or an ethics violation. But to continue to have this discussion meeting after meeting after meeting puts us in a position where we are frozen and completely incapable of moving ahead with the work of the board. And we have so much work to do over the next month to get these schools up and open and ready to educate students, that being stuck here is counterproductive.
Thank you. And I would like to say that as a governance team, we are stuck and unable to proceed because we have that personal sanctioning. And after 10 years on the board and having been part of those kinds of activities, it is counterproductive and it's a waste of time. And we need to allow our board attorney to advise us and we need to move forward. But it does not help our credibility with the public for us to be attacking one another routinely. And so I would beg my fellow board members to keep those conversations between themselves and the board attorney or the other board member privately. And let's not do this anymore because we have work to do. And that goes, you know, for all of us. The next hand I see is Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. And Ms. Fisher, thank you. I was going to say basically the same thing. I know we're trying to and what we, if we want to keep something in it or not, and then we always come back to the same thing, making comments, not direct comments, but making comments where everybody knows what those comments mean. And we get ourselves back into the same routine over and over again, and we definitely need to move forward. So if we're not policing each other, we're not policing each other, but respect one another. And we have to move forward and do the work that we're here to do.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jordan. And then Ms. Giovanelli.
You know, I would actually agree with some of that Ms. Patrica mentioned, but however, she's the one that actually is part of the ethics complaint against me. So that's made it personal because she was involved in it. I would have never done that to her, even when she did violate our policy. So thank you.
And Ms. Gittens.
I think the overwhelming comment that I would like to make is that we need to look at our policies. There are several times that things are done and we kind of talk it away, or there's crickets when stuff is brought up. And yes, I agree with you. The public is tired of hearing these types of things. However, they continue because we don't have any teeth in some of our policies. The policy says we shouldn't do this, but there's nothing else on the other end of it. So we do things like just retroactive things to the policy. We need to look at policies. And if the policy says you do this or you don't do that, there needs to be a consequence. We should not be able to go back and do a retroactive vote on a policy that was broken. And I believe that it was stated by Mr. P. Bruno that the policy that I had brought up, that was a policy, and at the time there was a policy broken. I don't want to keep bringing this up, but if things keep piling up,
Can we maybe
excuse me,
go back?
everybody, Miss Jordan, I'm speaking. Everyone else had their say so. Thank you. And I think the issue is we need to look at policies. And I have said this before, but every time I say something, there's crickets and we go on to the next topic. We need to look at policies and what we're going to do going forward. Then we don't end up here every time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gittens and Mrs. Giovanelli. Mr. P. Bruno.
Madam Chair, at this point, I know that we need to move forward because we have the RSM evaluation and the contract. The only thing I need from the board is a consensus as to taking out the language with regard to the public sanction. And I also need a consensus with regard to the obligation of board members to self-report. Those are the only two things that I need so I can move forward.
So then the first thing is that we need a consensus to take out the language about monitoring one another. Do I have that right?
The
And-
self-reporting part of the ethics and education.
Okay, and that's the second part, right?
The first part with regards to the public sanction and public
Right.
punishment language throughout the policy as well. And then the second part is with regards to board members' obligation to self-report other board members.
Thank you. Okay, so board members, on the first consensus regarding the sanctioning, the public sanctioning, those who want to remove that language, please give a thumbs up. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and those who, and we have 1 can live with it, and those who do not want to remove that language. Okay, let's try this one more time. Thumbs up if you want to remove the language about public sanctioning. 6. Okay, 6 and 1 can live with it. And then
The second
second
part is self-reporting.
right. And consensus on self-reporting.
Madam Chair, I'm not clear on what
I have a,
voting on here. I don't know.
I have a question about that one as well. I'm not sure what we're voting on.
So,
Okay.
so Madam Chair, if I may, the
Yes,
issue
please let Ms. Bruno.
in the ethics and education policy, there's self-reporting requirements. In other words, if a board member feels that another board member has violated the policy in terms of ethics and education, they have an obligation to report that board member. And this is what I need consensus about, whether or not to include that policy or remove it.
Is that a statutory requirement?
To self-report? No, I don't believe it's a statutory requirement pursuant to the Florida Statute 119. It's in this policy. Now, there are some things that you do have to self-report. For example, if you see child abuse, we're all mandatory reporters. But whether or not this board member may or may have not violated a policy, you know, that's the question. Does the board member have an obligation to self-report that policy violation or that ethical violation? That's the question that we have.
Okay, then board members, Ms. Morgan? Comment?
Yes, my question is this. Do we not have an obligation for employees to self-report any violations of district ethics policy?
Yes.
So my I would say that we have to hold ourselves to the same standard. That's my comment.
Thank you, Ms. Patrica.
If we are going to hold employees to that standard, we must hold ourselves to that standard as well.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Vaughn.
Yeah, I agree. We need to be held to the standard. I'm just looking for what lines exactly. I don't see anything that says, at least in my copy, self-reporting.
So line 108,
I'm sorry?
line 108 is pretty much.
Okay.
Line
108, all right.
137 discusses self-reporting of all covered individuals, which will include board members. Now, there's certain things, as I said, that we are obligated to self-report on. That would be, for example, child abuse issues.
So then,
Okay, so are we talking about that whole policy, that whole part of the policy, self-reporting B from all covered individuals through, because some of this is crossed out on mine, including termination?
Right, so it's from line 108 to 137. For example, on line 136, it says that if we leave it this way, that board members would have a obligation to report suspected violations of board policies, suspected violations of the code of ethics for public officers. So this is going back to that original discussion that we had with regards to board members policing each other. So this was part of the concern, and this is why I wanted guidance from the board.
Yeah, so, no, I agree. I guess I'm thinking about different kinds of self-reporting, because for the employees, isn't there something like if an employee is arrested?
Yes.
That you have to, okay, but that's.
If they see a policy violation, they have to report that as well. So the employees have to report anything that's a violation of the ethics in education or other board policies and other professional ethic standards pursuant to the statute. So the question that I have for the board is, there's been a lot of discussion about self-policing, and these particular provisions basically say you're going to self-police each other. And
that's exactly where I'm having the issue. So it seems that it's contrary to what we just said.
That's why I want guidance.
so I have three hands up. I have Ms. Gittens, Ms. Jordan, and Ms. Giovanelli, but I interpreted that as self-reporting, like reporting yourself, or like reporting child abuse as a mandated reporter. I did not interpret that as reporting a fellow board member for a policy violation. And so maybe it's just the way it is described, because self-reporting is different than reporting someone else. And so I'm not sure I have clarification on that, but in the meantime, we can quickly entertain Ms. Gittens, Ms. Jordan, and Mrs. Giovanelli, and then I really think we have to move on to RSM, or we're going to be way behind the 8 ball. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Gittens.
Okay, thank you. Number one, I think we need to define that self-report versus self-police. That is kind of concerning to me. What does that mean? So if we're going to take it out and put it somewhere else, we need to define those two arenas. And second, if we hold ourselves to the same standard as employees, how far does that go? Do we get the same protections? And then lastly, self-reporting to whom? And it goes back to number one, which is self-report versus self-police. And the last part of it is, do we have I guess a statutory or fiduciary duty or whatever to report something that's broken in a policy that we have that is not a DOE policy. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. I was going to ask the same question, to whom we would be reporting to, and then who would be monitoring this as well. And then also, it is contradicting what we just stated that we did not want to do. So I definitely am confused on how do we get here again?
And I think and I think that this is governed in the Florida Commission on Ethics. So, Ms. Giovanelli.
Okay, so I think we're forgetting we're elected officials. We're not employees. That's the difference here. So I think that maybe Mr. Dupe Bruno would clarify that. And I think statutorily, I don't even think we can, even if one of us thinks somebody did something wrong, how do we know even due process? We're entitled to due process. So that's where it falls back under the Ethics Commission regarding violating even a policy. We can't even do that because we are elected officials. So I think we need to really kind of just focus on that and the understanding of that. And I think that will clear all this up, and this is irrelevant because it goes back to statute. We are governed by the statute. And I'm not the attorney, so if you could please just clarify.
So, Madam Chair, what I'm going to do with regards to that portion is go back, review the language, and when I review the policy, I'll bring forth some language that probably will be a little bit more appetizing to the board. I do understand what the board's concerns are, and I have an idea as to where to go with it.
Okay, thank you. And then I think as constitutional officers, we are governed by the Constitution also. So with that, Mr. Bruno, then you'll bring this back to us and we will schedule another session once you have had an opportunity to work with your committee and the unions. And at this time, if anyone needs a 5-minute break, we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll move on to RSM evaluation and contract. Thank you. taking the place of Susan Johnson and Latana. How are you this morning?
Good. How are you, Madam Chair?
Fine, thank you. We welcome you and we appreciate you joining us and taking on the huge job of keeping moving forward. So,
Thank you.
welcome again. And welcome to our RSM partners, Clara, Nat, and Jennifer. And good morning, Ms. McClung.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so it is now 10:36 and we will resume our workshop this morning, and we're going to hope to end promptly at noon. And at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. McClung.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, board
morning.
members, Dr. Atkins, and Attorney Dupre Bruno. Also, welcome to our RSM members. So this morning, we have 30 minutes to discuss the evaluation that was completed by board members regarding RSM's performance over the past contract that was specifically delineated in the statement of work number 2. And just a reminder that this particular evaluation was made just to for this year, because there was not an evaluation in place when the contract was entered into with RSM. Not that I'm flying anywhere, RSM, and that for the upcoming year, there will be a different evaluation in place. That said, on this evaluation, the overall average was a 2.71, which fell into the effective range. There are 5 different areas that were considered during the evaluation: timeliness, progress updates, project objectives, accessibility and engagement, and communications. So we will address each of those areas and provide for comments, strengths if you would like to mention the things that you felt they did particularly well, any opportunities for improvement that you have noted that you want to see addressed if the contract is indeed approved at tomorrow's meeting. What would you like to see addressed in the coming year? So we'll begin with the area of timeliness. The average for that area was a 2.29, which fell into the needs improvement area. And Ms. Thomas will be taking notes around your comments. So at this time, I'll open it for comments around timeliness.
Okay. Good morning, board members.
I see
Comments regarding.
Morgan's hand.
Okay, Ms. Morgan, thank you.
Yeah, I think, as you can see, I did not give a good evaluation. I don't think it's necessarily the fault of RSM. I think it's primarily the fault of the board, because we have 3 employees, the superintendent, the auditor, and the board attorney. And it's our responsibility to direct and evaluate their work on a regular basis. And we've done that with 1 employee, that's the superintendent. We have not done that with our previous board attorney, nor did we do it with RSM. So in terms of what I considered the deliverables to be in the contract, they were neither timely, they weren't timely and not particularly well communicated. We have no work product from RSM after 1 year of a contract. Is that their fault or is it our fault? And in thinking about this and in talking with staff, I've come to the conclusion that I may have put the responsibility too heavily on them. That being said, as we move forward in terms of the new contract, I think we have learned a lot from our first year with RSM. I think we have to build a much stricter model of reporting and accountability going forward. But I did want to explain that I have given my evaluation considerable thought and how my thinking has changed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Morgan. And Ms. Gittens?
Thank you. I'm sorry. The lawn people have just shown up, so I apologize for that. When we first started working with RSM, I was the chair at the time. And in my opinion, they were very responsive. It was back and forth as to what it was we wanted or they were going to provide. And it was not concretized. And then as we moved into the hotline, I believe that put a kink in the armor as well, because it took on a life of its own. At first, we as a board decided, yes, we took a consensus to, go ahead and do it. And from that point, it started to kind of go south as to what it looks like and all of this type of thing. So I do not in any way, shape, or form say that the communication was not there with RSM. Some board members felt that I was, overstepping my bounds to communicate with them. However, at the time I was the chair and I tried to make sure that you all knew what was going on as well. And anybody has a right, they're our employee, anybody has a right to call them or check with them at any time. So I think that all of things being equal, that they were very timely when they started in, I believe it was November, the first report that they started to give. And that was after a conversation of board members saying, we don't know what's going on. So anyway, I feel that they were very responsive. I feel that they tried to mold whatever it is that we wanted them to do. I would like us to go back and look at that, the order of the process of what they're going to be investigating and kind of do that separation, like Ms. Morgan was saying. We need to hold the right people accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Giovanelli? Ms. Giovanelli, please unmute.
Yeah, I had that down, I'm sorry. So I actually would completely agree. I looked at their scope of work and they had a timeline. We just didn't give the direction on when to start it and the directive. There was mention that there was a directive that they were told not to speak to individuals. I am unaware of that directive. When I called them, they returned my calls and answered my questions. So I don't know where that came from. And I know there was a mention that we need to discuss that, but I agree that we all should have the same access to everyone to be able to do our job as an elected official on this board. So I think that we do need to have that conversation and make sure that the right direction is given to the RSM. But I totally agree. When I looked at the scope of work, they had it all planned out. We just didn't give the go, or I don't believe. So I don't know where that disconnect was, and I would love to hear that from them. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And before they respond, Ms. Patrica.
That was exactly my question. If I had a lengthy discussion with RSM after I completed the evaluation, and my evaluation did change as a result of that conversation for the better, because there were some misunderstandings, and it was in that conversation with them that I understood that there had been a directive given for no individual board member conversations. So if you could have them address that, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McClung, do you want to take back over, or shall I turn it over to RSM?
I'm happy to take back over, but my first thing would be to ask RSM to respond to that if they have some comments related to first timeliness and then the specific question about being able to respond to individual board members. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Clara from RSM. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Clara. Hi.
Good morning. Just to address about the communication, we did receive an email, I think it was back in the fall, from a board member requesting that any emails that we were submitting to include all board members. So we started doing that. If we were to receive an individual phone call, we were still calling back the individual board members from that perspective. But for email communication, it was requested that we include everyone. So we started doing that, including the superintendent and the board attorney at the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before we move on to the next area, I want to clarify what I'm hearing from board members in the area of timeliness. It seems that most of the concern was that the timeline was not followed. However, there is some uncertainty as to whether that was actually on the part of RSM or was a matter of RSM not being given clear direction by the board. Is that your understanding as well? Thumbs up if you agree with that. Thank you. Okay, so seeing that there is agreement around that, we'll move on to the next area, which is progress updates. The average for that standard was a 2.57, which is in the effective range. Any comments from board members around that? And I see Ms. Patrica's hand.
I still have a question about the communication issue. The conversation that I had with RSM last week resulted or concluded with an agreement that I would bring to the board the discussion about being able to communicate with individual board members. I was given the impression during that discussion that you received some kind of a directive that all information given to one board member had to be given to all board members, and as a result, you were hesitant to set up a regular telephone communication schedule with me. That, of course, has since been resolved, but am I not recalling our conversation correctly?
Thank you, Ms. Patrica. And considering that communication seems to be a big issue, I'm going to suggest that we skip progress updates for a moment and skip down to communications, which is actually the last area. And in that area, there was a 2.71 average, which again was in the effective range, but we do seem to have several questions around that. So if RSM, if you could please address Ms. Patrica's question. Thank you.
Hi, this is Clara again. Just to touch upon your comment, yes, that is what we talked about last week. Typically, part of our process is we will reach out to individual board members at least annually to have a one-on-one discussion as we're going through the process to kind of reassess risk. So that had not come up from that perspective, but we had reached out to the board chair. This is right when the pandemic hit. Mary, if you recall, we had a meeting set and then the pandemic hit. So we just kind of been scrambling with schedules since then. So we've been very cautious on how we've been reaching out. Again, if the individual board member has called us since then, we have returned that call without sending out overall communication. But we've made sure that any email or question that we received via email, that we were responding to the full board.
Ms. Patrica, does that answer your question?
Not really, but I'll let it go.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments around the area of communications? And I see Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. Sorry, I lost myself. Yes, the communication, I am the person who sent an email and asked that we would be able to receive anything that the chair was receiving that pertained to all of us. I asked that I personally received it. It had nothing to do with if Ms. Patrica sent them an email or this one sent an email. Whatever they were sending to us as a board, I wanted to make sure that we were receiving it because we did have an incident where it got lost in spam. So we did not have that information. So that is why I sent them an email asking for that to take place. I am that person who asked that. No time did I ever say, please do not call anybody, or I need to know what everybody is saying. But I do believe that as far as the it did start getting better once we asked for that to take place. The communication did start becoming more frequent. And even when I'm looking at these dashboards, if you go back and you put them all side by side, they change, but it's a word changes in the sentence. The sentence stays the same, but a word has changed. And I'm not sure if this is the place to speak about that or not. I mean, one will say obtain, one says looking forward to getting it. I mean, I put them all side by side the other day and I looked at them. So again, is that communication or is that the updates?
Hi, this is Clara from RSM. Is it okay if I speak again?
Yes, please.
Hi. So we have discussed internally, we regrouped internally on how we can improve our communication with you all if we are to continue with our contract. So this is something that, you know, we're addressing internally real time because we want to improve upon that. You know, you all were kind of in an influx last year. Are you going to have an internal auditor? Can you, you know, according to the DOE, is it going to be outsourced? You know, we've been paying attention to what you all are saying, and we are trying to adjust internally how we want to do things. And I think this is the year where, now that you know which direction you can go in, this is the year that you can get more of that structure in place. And if it is to be us, we're going to help you with that structure and come up with a more formalized communication plan as well. For example, quarterly updates to you all so we can present reports. We can present whether it's us doing the hotline. We need to have periodic updates with the chair to have that one-on-one. So it's not in the public record as well. Have the periodic updates with the individual board members. So communication is something that we've been thinking about and trying to think of ways how we can readjust and make it better for you all.
Thank you. I see Ms. Gittens and then Mrs. Fisher.
Ms. Fisher can go first.
All right, thank you. Ms. Fisher?
Period of the risk assessment, the onboarding, adjustments in identifying and working with specific staff members in different departments. And so I wondered if you could comment on that. I mean, is there some way we can help with making that more efficient, getting your communication with the staff that you're working with in each of the different areas, and also how do you feel the response time to you was regarding that?
I believe we mentioned back in September or October how the first project was going to be very important in how it was executed. So we wanted to be very careful in how we executed it because you hadn't had that formal function before. So our relationship in, you know, with the district personnel, whether it's a superintendent, department directors, etc., that was important on how we executed that first one. I think we're towards the end with that project, facilities. I think the communication back and forth has gone very well. I know the RSM team has had nothing but positive things to say about the district personnel and working with them. We've had very effective meetings with them to go over any observations we may have, you know, talking about the process, just, you know, talking about what we saw, and they were very accepting to that communication back and forth. So I would like to say that our first project went well with the communication back and forth and the ability to execute and get the project done. Jen or Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else on those areas.
Yeah, this is Jennifer, Martha. I would agree. You know, starting up an internal audit function is really putting and investing time to create a valuable, trusting relationship. And I think that we are starting to build upon that. Without trust, you all are not going to get the value that you deserve. So our relationship with the superintendent, with the folks at the district, with the leadership team, them being able to have a level of respect for what we've been able to accomplish in our own careers, you know, looking at us as subject matter experts is very important. So I'm listening to all the feedback, and we read your feedback about, you know, timeliness and communication. I think the time that's been spent has been good time to build that trust and develop that relationship. And the folks at the district have been very, very open with us and extremely cooperative.
Thank you, and that's why I wanted to bring that up, because I wanted to illustrate that there are, more in this situation than the board and RSM, and I wanted to appreciate the superintendent and the staff for the participation and the support that they have provided moving forward, and I think that we're probably now through our initial part of the growing pain. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Giddens.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure on record to say that the startup with RSM was the first time we had done this, and especially the first time we had done it with a firm. It was a moving target, and the communication piece, I was under the impression and was told that it was my role as chair to be the liaison with them. And some of that communication piece, and I don't want RSM blamed for a communication piece that was really a distrust of some board members of what I was doing or that I was hoarding information, which I wasn't. But I don't want that to be that it was them. It was a board situation that we needed to definitely work out. And like I said, it was a moving target in the beginning. We had never done this before, and we threw other things in there. And I think they did a wonderful job and communicating. And as far as their reports, sometimes things move quickly and sometimes they don't. And there was a time period in there when there was nothing happening, and we know why that was. So I think that they have done their job. They've done what we've asked them. We need to look at concretizing what we're asking them to do going forward. Should we do the contract? And that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Giddens. Okay. I do not see any other hands. Oh, Ms. Jordan.
I apologize. I just went out of Zoom, so I missed a portion of what was just stated. I just want to reiterate, there was nothing about distrusting. It was the fact that needing to have information so that we could be adequately prepared for discussion and to know what is going on. That's all it was about. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I see no other hands. Let me summarize what I heard around communications was that I heard from RSM that they are currently working on a new communication plan, so that if they should be, the contract should be renewed, they would be developing ways to establish a more clear communication timeline and some clear processes around that. Any other comments around communications? Okay, we look at the areas. Communications is obviously very much involved in project updates, and I believe there's been some conversation already around those updates, but are there any other discussion? Is there any other discussion around progress updates that has not already been mentioned? Ms. Giddens, is your hand back up, or is it just up from the last time?
No, it is. I'm not stuck.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
The question, I guess, that I'm asking the board then in this communication piece, how does the board see moving forward? Since Ms. Fisher is the chair, do we speak, do we wait to get, information from her as well as the update? Do we go directly to them? What is the chair's role?
I see Ms. Morgan's hand. I'm not sure if it's in response to that question. It's not. Okay, so let me ask first, are there any responses to Ms. Giddens' question? How would you like to move forward in the area of communications? Ms. Patrica.
Well, if we're making a decision on the contract, I'd like to hear from RSM. They've talked about internally working on their communication plan. What does that look like? What will that look like for us going forward?
Thank you. Anyone from RSM who would like to comment on that?
Hi, this is Matt.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we talked about internally, and perhaps have brought up, would be, the formation of an internal audit charter to really help define this process, regardless of how the board decides to move forward, to define the reporting cadence that the internal audit function will bring to the board. And one of the things that we talked about was sort of laying out a communication plan that would hopefully be included in some sort of charter to really to just define that process. And what it looks like to us, at least, or what we would typically suggest would be, at least a quarterly update to the board chair, at least a quarterly update to the superintendent, sort of independently, and then quarterly update to the board as a whole. And that would be where we would typically report our final reports. So as we were working through projects and working through reports, we would have end goals that we would be communicating to. Okay, we were planning to present this at the Q3 meeting, for instance, or the Q4 meeting. And then, in with that, if the hotline is something that would be handled by, the function, obviously that would be something that we would continue to provide updates on at a high level, to just provide some statistics on maybe calls that came in or other things like that is something that we typically do for audit committee type reporting. And then that's where we would hope to bring with the formation of the audit charter. And then, of course, we would hold at least annual meetings with individual board members, or, of course, more often, if individual board members wanted to establish a reporting or communication cadence with us, we would certainly be happy to do that. Or just a more, obviously individual phone calls. I think it's been brought up before. We're obviously happy to take individual phone calls if any member has a particular question or has a particular thing that they would like to discuss. I mean, obviously our phone lines are always open for that.
Thank you, Mr. Blondell. Ms. Gittens, did that answer your question?
Yes, I think it was Ms. Patrica's question as well, but no, that's fine with me. I just wanted to make sure that we were following what everybody wants.
Thank you.
Ms. McClung?
Sorry, I realized I muted myself too soon. Our next hand was Mrs. Morgan.
Couple of questions. So I understand in some comments that RSM made to me in an email that is essentially we're doing one project at a time. We're not doing them in parallel. And that a significant amount of their time was spent on the policy, which probably was a mistake on our part. That being said, when we talk about communication and procedure, I think that when you look at the contract, you see steps for every single project that they propose to do. I think we need to have a start date. I think we need to have an anticipated end date, just like we do with construction. I think we need to know at what point in the process we are ticking off the individual steps in that process. So if there's slippage, we have the opportunity as a board to call in RSM and say, what's the problem? If it's a staff problem, if it's something to do with the investigation, I think we need to have a conversation. Did I do something, Ms. Gittens? Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, so my concern is that we tighten this up both in terms of what's happening on a regular basis so that we are in a position to intervene if we feel that there is slippage. Also, deadlines. I mean, we're signing a contract that we're going to pay a certain amount of money, and I think that we should expect work product for that money at some point in time. Which brings me to one question that I did ask early this morning, and I haven't had an answer to. I am curious about how much has been paid to RSM, how much is still left on the contract to be paid. So that's my open question, and those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgan. Any other comments? Okay, so what I'm looking at time. The areas that we have not specifically addressed were accessibility and engagement, which was a average of 3.43, which was highly effective. And we touched on project objectives, which was a 2.57, which was effective. So rather than do those two areas separately, in the interest of time, if there are any comments, overall comments, or specifically related to those areas, we'll open it for those. Mrs. Vaughn.
Yeah, I have, excuse me, I have an overall question. When we first engaged RSM, there was a long list. They suggested a long list, and we did prioritize. I think, and especially with the COVID situation and so many things that have changed in the school district just since March, that it would behoove us to take a second look at that. Honestly, I don't even remember how we ranked the different, I know I have it somewhere, but I don't remember how we ranked the different suggestions that they had. And, you know, the biggest thing for us right now is cost cutting. So that's my question. Can we be supplied again, or maybe somebody remembers what our list of priorities were and what we're taking up after this particular project is completed?
Mrs. Vaughn, I'm going to ask Attorney Dupree Bruno, is that going to be discussed at the contract discussion, which is following this?
Yes, the cost will be discussed at the contract discussion.
And also the list. Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, Mrs. Vaughn is nodding, so I think that takes care of her question. Are there any other comments? Okay, seeing none. First, I'm going to say thank you so much for getting this done in 30 minutes. And then just the things that I heard repeatedly were that there needs to be consideration of making sure that communication plan goes forward, that there is a clear expectation around what the specific product that is to be delivered and around the timeline regarding those products. So if there is no further discussion, I will turn it back to Mrs. Fisher, and I thank you for your time today.
Okay, it didn't want to unmute. Thank you very much, Ms. McClung, for walking us through that. And in such a timely fashion, we're actually less than our 40 minutes, and that's great. So at this time, we will be looking at the RSM contract, and I will turn it over to Ms. Dupree Bruno to facilitate this part. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So board members, you should have a copy of the statement of works that details the fiscal year internal audit plan. The actual contract is based on a master service agreement that we have used in the district. And basically, we're just doing an addendum to extend that master service agreement for a year. The actual meat and potatoes of the contract is what's in the statement of work. If you look at the, I guess it's on page 2 of that statement of work, it dictates the assistance that the internal auditors are planning to provide, ethics and education policy, purchasing and procurement compliance, human resources, recruitment and onboarding, information technology risk and security assessment, ad hoc meetings, request and research, ethics and education, fraud, waste, and abuse hotline monitoring. So I think what I would like to do is to move forward with each of those sections, have RSM answer any questions that you may have, and then we can discuss the cost and anything else that you feel is necessary to discuss to be informed as to whether or not you want to move forward with a contract with RSM. So the first section would be the ethics and education policy, which is pretty simple, which is to assist with that process. I believe they have been involved in that process since the beginning. And at this point, there's not too much for them to do with regards to the process because we already have a game plan. I've pretty much taken the lead on that at this point, and we'll be revising the policy, but including them because there's some things that will affect the internal auditor when we speak about the waste, fraud, and abuse portion of the policy. Any questions on that, board members?
Ms. Morgan? Ms. Morgan?
Yes, I think we should drop the ethics and education policy portion from their audits. I agree that their work is done. I'm not sure that there's more work for them to do. Certainly, if Attorney Dupuy-Bruno needs to talk to them about some particular something, that doesn't need to be contractual. They're our internal auditor. They are her colleague. And I don't think we need to be paying for any more work on that policy. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. So, Ms. Patrica.
What have we paid for that work up to this point? Does anybody have that information?
I don't have the information as to what has been paid on anything with regards to RSM. I don't know if there's somebody in the resource center that may know that. If not, we will have to provide that information to the board at a later time. And I don't know if RSM knows what they have been paid up to this point. So we will have to provide that information at a later time. I'll try to get that to you ASAP.
This is Jennifer Murtha from RSM. If I could just hop in, I think the conversation is excellent, and we are your internal auditors. If you have questions, I think we've demonstrated having conversations, in the past about just about anything. So that I think that was just an excellent point that was raised. We are your internal auditors. If you have questions for us, discussions with us that you want to have, I agree that it doesn't need to be so, contracted out. And like we said before, we're happy to always pick up the phone and give our thoughts.
Thank you very much for that, Jennifer. Ms. Giovanelli?
In looking at the prior contract, which is basically it's the same or similar, there was a $5,000 fee for that. So I think it's really important to know what's been paid, because it also the facility construction was $55,000, purchase and procurement was $50,000, human resource recruitment onboarding was $50,000, and ad hoc request research was $10,000, which I believe is different in this newer contract. So I think it's vital for us to be able to know what we've spent and what we haven't spent, and to be able to go forward. So I have to agree with Ms. Patrica and Ms. Morgan. We do need to know that information.
Hi, this is Clara from RSM. Is it okay if I speak?
Yes.
Yes, Clara, please go ahead.
I don't have the details in front of me, but I can tell you that we've only charged you for our work in working with ethics and education, the hotline policy, and we've only progress billed you for the facility. So all those other areas we have not billed because we have not touched those areas. We have not billed for any calls that we get, any questions that we get. We have not provided billings for that. We've only done a progress bill for facilities, and then the level of effort that we put in for the ethics and education.
Thank you, Clara. And I think Dr. Atkins has something to add to this. Dr. Atkins?
I just was going to add, I know that our staff is working on that right now. And as I came back to verify that, I see Dr. Desamores is at the podium, so maybe she can address it further, because I know she was one of the ones that was participating in that ongoing email exchange that was taking place earlier around that question.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Desamore, Dr. Desamore.
Good morning. Yes. So to date, in this fiscal year, we've paid RSM $73,000. That was over the course of several invoices, which we can provide the detail for to board members so you can see what was on those invoices. I don't have those particular invoices in front of me now, but I do know the total paid so far this year is $73,000. And the board approved amount of the contract at the beginning of the fiscal year, and I say the beginning, I think it was maybe around September, was up to $190,000. So of that board approved contract amount of $190,000, we've spent 73 so far.
25 of that 73 includes the risk assessment, which was a separate contract.
Thank you very much.
Because we've only billed 48,000 against that 109, that last SOW from September.
Thank you. Okay, board members, Miss Jordan.
Yes, thank you. Can you also, I agree with them regarding the ethics and the whistleblower, that probably we can take that off because they've already helped the attorney produce items for them to look at, is which we had asked them to do. The whistleblower hotline monitoring as well, is that the 15,000 plus, is that what we were looking at for Lighthouse, or is this including or in addition to the third party vendor?
So the amount
This,
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, you go, I'm sorry.
But what I was going to say is that there has been some discussion with regards to the hotline and whether or not RSM will be receiving those phone calls directly and then funneling them. The recommendation is that we use Lighthouse to do that because it's already included in their cost. And so once Lighthouse receives the calls, they're the ones who will be funneling it to either RSM for waste, fraud, and abuse, or to HR for any other type of employee type matters. So this part will most likely, once the board gets all of the information with regards to Lighthouse, not be one of the responsibilities of RSM.
Okay, so then where does that come in then on this contract, as after Lighthouse has received and sent it to the appropriate departments? So does that fee then become the $200+ an hour, or where does that fall into this fees and expenses?
So once RSM receives their information from Lighthouse and they start doing their process for the waste, fraud, and abuse, their fee is $200 an hour. So Lighthouse is just going to be the intake center doing the case management and funneling it out to the right departments. RSM is handling the waste, fraud, and abuse calls.
Okay, so in saying that, if I may have just one more. So if they're handling those calls at $200 and some an hour, that's not projected on the bottom line here as far as the total. And we have no idea what that even looks like.
Yeah.
So that's just, it's just out there in the air.
So that is something that we have been discussing, and I'll let RSM talk about that, but that is a concern that has been raised. I don't know if Clara wants to answer or add to what I just said on that. I think there was also just a flat rate too, so, but Clara, if you want to talk to them about that.
Hi. So the 15,000, we wanted to just include an estimate, and that billed out at the $200 an hour. We don't know what that number is going to be, but I know last time we had the workshop talking about the hotline and how that was going to work. You know, we're not going to expend any hours or time or money. We're going to be coordinating with the attorneys first. So we're not going to go off, do our own thing without getting an approval from you all. So we just wanted to provide just an estimate. Again, this is an estimate in there of $15,000. It could be less, it could be more, because we still just don't know about the volume that's going to come in and the level of work that's going to be associated with it.
Thank you. I just am very worried about what that could look like at the end. So that's just my comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Are you finished? Okay, Ms. Gittens, then Mrs. Patrica.
I think Ms. Patrica was before me. She can go ahead.
Ms. Patrica?
So we have been billed 48 out of the 55 for the facility audit. Yes, is that how I am to understand what we have paid up to this point?
30 out of the 55 for the facilities construction.
30 out of the 55. So where does the other 18 go?
The ethics, I'm pulling up the ethics in education.
So that exceeded the $10,000 we had approved for that. Did we ever, as a board, have that discussion or come back and agree to spend more?
I believe we spoke to Chair, which was, I believe Mrs. Gittens at the time, talking about the level of effort that had been put in place with this. And so we had sent an extra bill to cover those hours.
I don't even know how to respond to that.
So unfortunately, we don't have our, we don't have either Ms. Johnson or Ms. Reeder here. So you know, they'd have to look into our budget thing unless Dr. Desamore can answer that. I'm not aware of it. Thank you, Dr. Desamore.
Yeah, let me try to help just here. I was looking and it appears that in September of 2019, there was a good cause agenda item that we took to the board at the time that we approved the $190,000 amount for the RSM contract. In the action for that, we talked about the approval of the statement of work number 2 from RSM, which was to provide assistance with the ethics and whistleblower policy, facility and ethics, purchasing, and procurement compliance in an amount not to exceed $190,000. As I look at the statement of work, I'm not sure, and this is very quickly going through, I don't know that it was broken down, that it was just supposed to be $10,000 for that particular part. But I think that was the point in time in which the board held a conversation about the fact that the original $50,000 that had been approved for the RSM contract, based on what the board at the time talked about wanting to do with the whistleblower policy, that we could potentially need additional funds at that time. So that's when the additional 190 was approved, and that's the amount that we have not exceeded during this fiscal year.
Thank you.
And this is Claire again. This is Claire again from RSM. Yeah, these are estimates. The level of effort for the ethics and education was beyond what we had anticipated. You had changeover internally. When I say internally with your external board attorney, we were working with one individual who ended up leaving that firm. So we were working with another individual. Then it was switched over to an internal board attorney. We had multiple great iterations talking through the ethics and education with the district staff. So again, these were estimates. We're only billing for level of work performed on those projects. We don't anticipate, knowing the projects better with you all now, we don't anticipate going over in any of the areas. But again, I just want to reiterate, these are estimates.
Thank you.
Given just, I'm sorry, just one more comment, Ms. Fisher, knowing, understanding the conversation that the board is having now and knowing that, we are at the end of the approved time period for the contract, it is excellent points and excellent times to make sure that, the scope of work and how the work will take place with any of these future initiatives like that whistleblower hotline, that we structure it in such a way that the cost benefit for the district is there, so that we have the service that we need, but we structure it in such a way where it comes within the cost constraints that we would, as a district and as a board, you would like to put around that.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other comments, board members or RSM members? Ms. Bruno, may I turn it, Ms. Morgan.
And I also see Ms. Patrica's hand. We're both on the board. Anyway, I think with respect to this contract, there's some work that needs to be done between our board attorney and the finance office, and specifically with Mrs. Millay. We need to align the scope of work in the contract with deliverables and payment, so that the finance office knows, right now it's just an open checkbook, and we don't know. We're just paying money out and we've got no reports, no nothing. So I think this contract has to be, I have no problem moving forward with RSM. And as I said, I think part of our problem this first year was our lack of supervision, lack of oversight, failure to challenge what was going on or ask questions about what was going on. But we need to build our accountability and their accountability into the contract. And it has to be clear to Dr. Desamore and her staff when payments are made, what they're being made for. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Ms. Patrica, ladies, if you could raise your hands on the participants list, that's very helpful. But in the meantime, Ms. Patrica, please.
Yeah, I'm looking at the SOW too, and it does say that if there are any changes in fees or in scope, that they will come before the board immediately. And this did not come before the board. We have spent more on a policy that in my estimation, I saw the sample policy that was provided by RSM, and it was completely tone deaf to, union negotiations and contracts. And I think that may have been part of what led us down the wrong road on this. So I have significant concerns about moving forward without any sense of how this money is going to be spent, because the parameters that we had in place for the past year have been exceeded without our knowledge.
Thank you, Ms. Patrica. Ms. Gittens?
Yes, excuse me. In response to the policy that was submitted by RSM, we met with them. They came and talked to the board, and the policy was submitted based on what we asked them to do. All of the other ins and outs of it that came up later, that kind of bubbled up, was not, I don't think their fault at that point. Like I said, it was something that it was new, and all of these other aspects had to be brought into it. In conclusion, though, I feel that if we're going to go with Lighthouse doing the calls and sorting the calls through the whistleblower line, through the hotline and all of that, that does create a difference for the contract with RSM. So I would like to ask our attorney to, and along with accounting, to look at what are those delineations, because it was before that the calls would come into the hotline, they were going to go through RSM and then over to here to sort and all. So now that we have a different view of that, we need to kind of sort those pieces out and say, this is what Lighthouse would do, this is the cost. This is what RSM will do, and this is the cost. And just make sure everybody is sure with timelines what we are expecting.
Thank you, Ms. Gittens. Ms. Bruno, do you want to respond to that?
The point is well taken, board members. I do agree that we need to speak with finance with regards to the specific cost and work on putting some timelines in the statement of works. I don't know how much the ethics in education, I think it's the $15,000 that's there. I'm not sure. I'll have to find out in terms of if this is just for the cases that are coming to them, and then they were thinking of the additional $200 per hour for the case management portion. So we'll make sure that we clarify that. The other question I have for you is with regards to these other portions in this contract. Are there any other questions in terms of what they're planning to do with anything else from purchasing and procurement, human resources, the IT, risk and security, ad hoc meetings, and that's just something when staff needs to call, but these other projects, are there any questions with regards to that?
Okay. I don't see any hands raised, Ms. Bruno. Oh, two. Ms. Gittens and Ms. Vaughn.
Yes, my question is that when we initially set their priorities in order that they were going to do the internal audits, I would like to revisit that. And I think I brought this up before, but especially with us doing the new policy, the ethics policy, I would think that we would just do an overhaul of everything to do with that and move that particular audit up so that as we're including this new ethics policy, if there's anything else we need to look at, we're looking at it all at one time, kind of doing a tune-up and an overall overhaul of one particular area before we set in this new policy, the ethics policy. So I would really like us to look at, as a board, reordering the process that they're going to do for internal audit.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gittens. Ms. Vaughn?
My comment is similar to that of Ms. Gittens. Not so sure about how much involvement we need with the policy, because it sounds like Ms. Dupree Bruno has that covered with going back to the union, et cetera. But there's some other things, and when I said earlier, I don't even remember. I had looked at this when it first came out, and I forgot this part of it. But we did have other areas that we could have possibly looked at. And again, I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier. With the way things have changed since March in the district, I really think it behooves us to look again at this, and considering that one of our biggest expenses is going to be in operations. I'm wondering if that might not be an area that we need to look at, either operations or even just in academic services. I mean, HR, there's so many areas where we're going to need to take a look at the costs and see what we can do to cut costs.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? There, I mean, the purchasing and procurement is important, but as we look at some of the HR issues and bringing in more people, the most efficient way to use our maintenance crews for cleaning and There's so many issues that revolve around that. And then in the operations area with the buses, and that's going to be a huge difference as well. So that's why I'm wondering if we should reevaluate what we have here and maybe take a look and see if there was something that we didn't put on this list originally that we might need to add in. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
I think that makes sense. Ms. Bruno, do you have comment regarding that? And is that something that we could get support from the superintendent and staff about identifying things that may be more of an issue than they were before March?
I think that's probably a wise idea, is to reach out to staff, speak to Dr. Atkins, and see if there's anything else that may need to be reviewed and bring it back at a workshop so you can prioritize the work that RSM is doing. The question that I have for the board is it okay to move forward with the 1-year addendum? We are going to be moving forward with the revisions to the statement of works with regards to deadlines, and we probably will be changing some more things if we discover that some of the things outlined here is not exactly what we want them to spend their energy on. But I do need to know whether or not we're going to move forward with the addendum subject to the revisions in the statement of work.
Okay, and before we ask the board about that, we would go to Ms. Jordan, who's had her hand up, and then to Ms. Patrica. Yes, Ms. Bruno.
Let me explain what my thought process is on this. The contract is going to end. We do need to have an internal auditor on staff. So that's what, and based on what I'm hearing from the board, the evaluation indicated that they were effective and the board is willing to move forward with them. I guess that's the first question. Is the board willing to move forward with them? If the board is willing to move forward with them, we met our statutory obligation. We have our internal auditor. Now, what the internal auditor, in terms of the work assignments that you give to them, that's something that we can discuss and change if we need to. That's my thought process on that.
Okay, then at this point, do you want me to poll the board for a consensus that we move forward with the contract?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, then board members, at this time, are we all in agreement that because of the effective evaluation, we will move forward for the next year with a contract to comply with our statutory requirement to have an internal auditor, with the understanding that we will be able to look at the different project fees and expenses and make changes as needed. So yeah, I'll ask thumbs up for moving forward with RSM as our internal auditor for the next year. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and Ms. 5 and 2 can live with it. Okay. Ms. Bruno?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So then we'll have a simple addendum that just extends the contract for 1 year, and then we will present the statement of work, because basically this is your employee and you get to tell them what you want them to do. So that's how we're going to treat this.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate your help and support with that. At this time, Ms. Jordan and then Mrs. Patrica.
Thank you. Looking at, and I'm sorry, I keep going back to the fees and expenses. On 6/19, we received the dashboard with the for construction, and it looks like that is they're just going to have to present it to the board. So it looks like that's just about finished as well. So when I see that on here, that's a little bit confusing because it states on the 19th, provided updated draft to management with management action plans. And then the next step says obtain finalized management action. So that kind of like contradicts itself. And if you look at go back and look at, and I'm not sure if Matt or whomever writes these up, if you look at them, They just changed like a word or two, but it's the same verbiage without just that one minute thing, like obtained, finalized. So can you explain, are you finished with this, with facility and construction?
Hi, this is Matt. So we have finished the field work and the test work with facilities construction, and we have prepared a report that is in discussions with management and the superintendent. We've reviewed the report with members of management and superintendent, and as part of our internal audit reports, we do include a management response section. There is one item that we are pending final responses from management on for their management's response section. When we receive that, we will then be prepared to finalize the report and distribute it to the board.
So that, okay, if I may, it doesn't state that you're waiting on anything. So for us to know that your next steps would be that you're in need of something, that would be something probably we would need to know that, because by looking at this, it looks like you're getting ready to finalize and submit it to us, and that you're not waiting on anything. So it would be good for us to know those details. So we could maybe assist you at obtaining those.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, so the update that we sent on, I guess, for last Friday, the 19th, it did say that we were, one of the next steps was to obtain the finalized management action plans. I guess that not having seen a report yet, maybe that wasn't as clear, and apologies for that. We can certainly update that to make it more clear. But really what that means is that it's management's action plan in response to the observations that we've noted. So like I said, I know we've had some discussions with them. I know they're still working on finalizing those, and as soon as we get them, if there are no further discussions needed, then we will, between RSM and management, then we'll finalize and send the report.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I may real quick. And also, I think I read in this contract, and I may have to stand corrected, that if you, in a timely manner, if you're not able to obtain the information that you need, then there will be an additional charge to us for that. Is that correct?
I would not say that obtaining the responses, the management has been very responsive thus far. I would not say that anything that we've done or that management has or hasn't done has risen to the level of being considered untimely. It's part of the process where we present findings and observations and make sure that the facts that we've stated in the report are accurate, and making sure that everything that we've said is considering all the facts from management's perspective. And then again, like I said, they would provide responses to it. They've been very responsive thus far, and we haven't seen any issues with their timeliness in responding to anything.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. And if I may make a comment, Matt, regarding the dashboard, when I print it out, it's really hard for me to discern between the in progress and the complete color coding. They're very similar in color when they're printed out. I don't know if there's anything that can be done about that, because I think sometimes it's easy to miss that whether it's in progress or complete. It's really hard to tell with the blue and the green as it's printed. So I just wanted to mention that. Ms. Patrica.
Yeah, I just want to say that the reason why I can live with it is because I don't want to be out of compliance with the statute. But this conversation has created significant questions for me in my head regarding moving forward with RSM. I am really bothered by the expenditure of $8,000 on a specific item without board approval. I'm really bothered by that. And what I'm hearing from the board is the dashboard updates that we're getting are really not very informative, and perhaps the inclusion of more detail and more readability would be helpful there. And I need more transparency going forward. You know, I think it was Clara that mentioned earlier a trusting relationship. I don't have that trust right now, and I'm not saying that it can't be built, but I felt good after our discussion of your of the RSM evaluation. I do not have that same sense as we are completing this workshop. Thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Patrica. Any other comments or questions? Attorney Bruno, do you have anything to add to this?
The only thing I will add is that I'll be working with Dr. Desmore and Ms. Millay to try to come up with some parameters, some timelines, etc. Review the estimates, send it back to RSM, and the contract will be very simple, just an addendum extending their current contract for 1 year. And then again, as an employee, you have an opportunity to direct your employee in terms of what you want them to do. So those are my only comments.
Thank you. Okay. I have a question for you, Attorney Bruno. So following your consulting with Dr. Desmore and Ms. Millay, then will you be prepared to advise the board and help us with the direction that we need to go in providing direction to RSM?
Yes, we'll go ahead and set up a workshop to be able to address those things and prioritize and the projects that are needed and all of the wonderful things that we discussed today.
Thank you very much. Okay. That concludes at 11:47 our purpose of our workshop. And now we'll move on to good of the order. And so, Ms. Giovanelli, anything for good of the order?
I have none. Thank you.
Oh, okay, Ms. Patrica?
No, thank you.
Ms. Jordan?
I have none, thank you.
Good. Ms. Gittens?
Yes, I just, and not to beat a dead horse, but when we were discussing earlier about the union and this new policy, I still would just, I mean, are we then expected that if we each meet with the union that we'll know what their concerns were? Because Ms. Patrica mentioned that they were very upset about, you know, lack of involvement. And I'm not sure how to go about gleaning that same information. And before the answer is given to that, Ms. Morgan, when I laughed, the people doing the lawn came to the window to wave goodbye and kind of, you know, kind of took me off guard there a little bit. So no, I was not laughing.
No, I saw you on the screen and was like, oh my God, what did I say? What happened?
No, it wasn't you. It was somebody going, anyway, okay. I don't know if someone can answer. Ms. Dupree Bruno, you have your hand up to answer that. Thank you.
So with regards to the union and the forthcoming policy, we will be meeting with the union and we will be able to find out exactly what their concerns are and address those concerns prior to coming back to the board. So rest assured, we will meet with them.
Thank you very much, Attorney Bruno. Ms. Vaughn?
None right now, thank you.
Okay, and Mrs. Morgan?
I just have one, and I don't know if this is the appropriate way to bring it up, but there's been a lot of conversation about waivers with respect to COVID-19 and employees. And so not right now, but at some point, I would like to hear from the board attorney and the superintendent about whether there are waivers, whether waivers are being anticipated. I just would like to have that conversation. So that's my ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And my question is, my good of the order is also related to the COVID-19. I've had some reports from my constituents here in the Cape that there are multiple positive cases, which I don't think I have heard about, and that some of our staff who are working in the buildings are being denied personal protective equipment, until after July 1st. So at some point then, I would ask for Superintendent Atkins to help address that. And I just wanted to also say that the virtual graduations were a new thing and quite awesome. So thank you everybody for your participation. Ms. Bruno, do you have anything for good of the order?
The only thing, if I'm hearing the discussions earlier, I would ask board members, and I have mentioned this to staff as well, if there's ever a concern about a board member violating policy or any ethical issues that you would like to run past me, please feel free to call me. I would be more than happy to try to address that.
Thank you very much. Dr. Atkins.
Just a couple of things to address some of the issues that were just raised relative to COVID-19 and the response. We do have return to work guidelines that we follow. In those, we do have a requirement. If we do have somebody that is positive of COVID, then we do get doctor's confirmation, to get them to return to work. In addition to that, as it relates to waivers, there is you recall the governor had put out in his phase 2, reopening, talking about those that are medically fragile. So we do have, as a part of our return to work, 65 and older or has health concerns but would like to return to work, we do have a waiver out there for that. I have also asked our staff attorney, who I know is working with the board attorney, to provide a little bit more of an in detail response. When it comes to cases, I think you've noticed that you do receive text alerts when we receive them. I'm not going to say that there's cases out there that are not reported to us. I would hope that they are. We do have a process in place where that does occur, but once we learn of those cases in our office, superintendent's office, then those are reported, to the board. So again, I think over the weekend you had a couple of reports that came to you. We'll continue to do that, and that's it. In terms of personal protection equipment, I think that that continues to come up. But we've continued to address that before, and we'll continue to. But when we have those requests, we try to get the employee the equipment, like a mask or gloves or a hand sanitizer. We have had some supply chain issues that, again, we've reported to the board, but also, like I said, as we continue to, get those requests from employees, we provide that equipment. And that's it for my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then, seeing no other business, excuse me, I have one more hand up, Ms. Whittens.
I'm sorry, it was kind of going along with what the superintendent said. Our sports have kicked back up for practices and all that, and yet nationally we're noticing, and even locally, that professional teams are backing off because of COVID things. And I guess the question is, how are we monitoring? Are we doing temperatures? Are we doing what to make sure that we don't end up having an outbreak? And also with that, is there any hazard pay that goes to some of our maintenance people that go in and clean up afterwards? I know they have PPEs, but do they get that extra hazard pay for doing that? And that was my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So at this time, I don't know if Dr. Atkins has any further.
Just some of that. We obviously will continue to evaluate our athletic plans and summer camp and so forth. I do think we did provide those guidelines to the board in an update, but I'll verify that. If not, Mr. LaRosa has put those out there. So those are what we follow when it comes to our athletic conditioning that's going on. And then and then the other question, I'm sorry, Ms. Gittens, remind me of what the second question was.
I was just asking about hazard pay for some of our you know, we're highly vulnerable, like going in and cleaning up, and our maintenance people and people that are more highly, you know, susceptible to things.
Right. You know, the only time we've had that thus far is whenever we have the situation with our summer feed programs where they were outside of their normal contract. So that's when they were being provided the pay. But to my knowledge, I don't believe we're applying that to any other job group. It's a little bit different. You know, maintenance staff will go in there after the fact and do cleaning. It's you know, no different really than our custodians doing deep cleaning. Also, they are, you know, when I see them around here, they're typically wearing, you know, masks and gloves and things like that. So the food service workers are the only ones that have gotten the additional pay.
Well, is there any thought of the ones going in to clean up when we do have a case that we find, giving them any, you know, preference or whatever? Because that is different than just doing a deep cleaning where nothing has happened, as opposed to a deep cleaning because there's the virus within that building.
It's been discussed, and at this time, I don't believe there's any further discussion I'm aware of on increasing pay. I mean, it's part of job responsibilities.
Dr. Atkins, Ms. Patrica.
And they are, you know, remember, so a lot of that work is done by contractors. I just got a text, so that's what they're paid to do.
Have I updated the board on the FHSAA return to play and fall sports? Have I already updated you guys on that?
I don't recall that.
Well, they're supposed to be putting together, staff is supposed to be putting together conditions that districts should consider as we return to play. That's the first thing. The second thing is they have a task force going right now to make recommendations on what sports will look like when schools reopen. So we'll be getting guidance from the FHSAA relatively soon.
Thank you very much. Okay. Ms. Gittens?
I'm sorry, I just, on Ms. Patrica's comment, so FH, I always, is preparing a return to play process, but we've already returned. So
correct. They were not timely in that. They were not timely in that.
Okay.
The way it stands now is each district is essentially doing what's appropriate for their area, and whatever guidelines are put out will not be a requirement to scale back what's already been done, but can be used as guidance moving forward as things open up more. That's essentially the point of, and there has been some frustration that these guidelines or conditions were not published earlier.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patrica. Okay, board members, it is 11:58, and seeing no other business, this workshop is concluded, and we'll see you this afternoon at 1 p.m. Thank you very much.
Are we coming back to this same location, or do we have a different?
Yes, the same.
No, ma'am, there's a different link.
There's a different link? Okay, thanks.